Dear friends, thank you for joining us for another episode of Talking Europe, this special edition focusing on the European Parliament elections. Today we have with us Guy Verhofstadt, member of the European Parliament from Belgium, former Prime Minister of Belgium, and of course the current President of the European Movement International. Guy, thank you very much for joining us for this discussion. We have been hosting several MEPs, and of course we wouldn't miss the chance of having you on our sofa. The last 5 years have been interesting, to put it mildly. The EU had to deal with a variety of challenges. What do you think have been the main achievements of the past legislature?
I think the best thing was certainly the response to COVID with the Next Generation Fund. And that was a combined effort by Parliament and by a number of member states. And we succeeded to convince the Commission to come forward with a real bold proposal. Has become the Next Generation Fund, and to use Eurobonds for the first time, what was impossible a few years ago. So I think that was the biggest achievement. And then the biggest disappointment I found was that the same Commission was not capable to come forward with a proposal for a European Defence Union. And this 2 years and a few months after the start of the war in Ukraine, after the brutal invasion of Russia. So my expectation was, okay, this is the moment to come back to one of the key proposals of Europe and the European movement, because it was already formulated in the beginning of the 50s, that proposal. So that was my biggest disappointment, yeah.
And of course, we also had the opportunity to experience the first experiment with deliberative democracy. The Conference on the Future of Europe brought together hundreds of citizens from across the continent to feed their ideas into the legislation.
I think it was a very good exercise. I'm very positive about it. The only problem is that we didn't succeed to use this as a platform for reform in the Union. So, and that didn't happen. On the other hand, I would say that we need to repeat it. It would be good that this is an exercise we do every 5 years, maybe at the midterm, seems to me a good moment, so that you can look back to what the new Commission has done the last 2.5 years and what they still need to do in the next 2.5 years. So a midterm conference on the future of Europe, assessing what is done and what is not done with citizens seems to me a very good exercise.
Absolutely, and the European movement will be on the forefront of that process.
We are a civil society organization. We represent, in fact, a lot of organizations based on citizens. So I think it's the natural role of EMI. Yeah.
Indeed. Now, we're just a few weeks before the European elections. A lot of issues are in people's minds. They're selecting their representatives. What do you think will be the defining debates of this campaign that will really shape the Parliament?
You feel that it will be a fight between Eurosceptics at the one hand and more pro-European policies at the other hand. And populists are trying to explain to the public opinion for the moment that this Europe doesn't work and that we have to go back to what I call a confederation of nation states in the coming years. But the problem with the European Union for the moment is exactly that. So what we see is that populists are saying we need to take back control on the national level because Europe doesn't work well. But what is not working well in the European Union is exactly what they are proposing. The intergovernmentalism, the fact that you need always the approval of 27 member states before you can do something, before you can act. Take, for example, migration. So that's a very popular item for populists. They are blaming Europe. No, they have not to blame Europe. The reason why for 15 years there was no agreement to really tackle the problem of migration in Europe was because of 27 member states were not in agreement with each other. And it's only because we now have skipped the rule of unanimity that we succeeded to have an agreement on migration the last months, just before the election. So there you have a proof of the fact that following the recipes of the populists means more trouble, more migration. and that the only way forward is to have a more integrated European Union. And they are talking about sovereignty and sovereignty. But let's be honest, what is the sovereignty of an individual member state of the Union in a world dominated by Putin in Moscow, by Xi in Beijing, and maybe tomorrow Trump in Washington? In such a world, what is the only way to defend the interests of our citizens is to do it together, because it's a huge pressure that we need to develop against these other, I would say, big empires.
Now you said it, Europe is being engulfed, surrounded by authoritarian, anti-democratic leaders and powers. But even within, we just saw Wilders forming a new government in the Netherlands.
Orban.
We have Orban. There will be 6 governments in the Council that will feature far-right parties in one shape or form. Will that make our efforts for closer European integration harder?
I think, but at the other hand, maybe then we see now who is in favor and who is against. So maybe it's better to convince the public opinion to follow a pro-European line instead of this Eurosceptic policies. But it will be a big battle. We are at the brink, not only in Europe, but you see what's happening in the US, in the fight between Democrats, Republicans, Biden, Trump. Democracy is at stake. And that's the same is happening in Europe. And there is a general fight, I think, battle between autocracies and democracies. I'm from time to time very surprised that even rational people are saying, yeah, maybe a good autocracy is not bad, but a good autocracy doesn't exist. An autocrat, he eliminates democracy at the end, and he does, he will follow or develop bad policies.
Now we see that in our polling, people are starting to question whether democracy works, and if it's better to have a strong leader who will take decisions quickly without having to consult.
Yeah. I was struck also by another ranking that I saw a few days ago, in which they were asking people, do you live in a democracy? And even people in China and Russia were saying, yeah, we live in a democracy. Yeah. What is clearly not the case, because you cannot really vote for the Chinese leader or the Russian leader. It's all pre-cooked. There is no real democracy. But nevertheless, based on social media, based on propaganda, based on all this, yeah, there are many people believe, so they like democracy. 80% of the world population wants to live in democracy, and a lot of them who are living in an autocracy think that they are living in democracy. So that means that there is a crisis of the democracy. And how to overcome that, I think we need to reinvent it. We need to reform democracy, we make it more modern. We need to have a system partly representative, but also direct democracy, and find new ways forward. And in that sense, I think the Conference on the Future of the European Union was a good exercise, because it showed that it is possible to engage people in a democratic process in a positive way, not in a negative way. People in this conference needed to discuss, debate together, and to come forward with proposals that could be supported by 70%, it was, of the group. And they succeeded in that. So I think the battle is not lost, but we as Democrats need to be ready to reform our own system.
Indeed. And ambitious in that reform.
And to be ambitious in that reform, and not to shy away from radical solutions, because I think nothing is eternal. Democracy is in fact very young. You could naturally refer to Athens and so on, but that was an exception in the world of 2,000, 3,000 years ago. But in fact it's very young, it's 200 years old. And for a lot of reasons, we went into a representative democracy based on elections, and that needs to continue. But a direct involvement of citizens is a key for me, because it's the only real recipe against populism.
Now, looking forward, as a last question perhaps, 5 years from now, when we will be preparing for the next European elections, what would you like to see having been achieved in that time frame?
I come back to the defense union. I think this is crucial for the security of Europe. Even when it is Biden who wins the election in the US, let's prepare for that, and let's go back to the initial ideas of the founding fathers of the European Union, because they wanted to do that. Schuman, Monnet, Spaak, De Gasperi, they negotiated it, and so we have to go back. We miss it. You cannot continue to waste such an amount of money, 260, 270 billion of euro every year, and have such a bad security system in Europe, completely depending from the US. That's the reality. So that seems for me the key issue. And then institutionally, to get rid of unanimity the fastest as possible, to find a breakthrough and that's key. Otherwise, we will continue to act too little, too late when we are confronted with a crisis.
And I guess one comes with the other. One depends on the other.
Exactly.
Without qualified majority.
Exactly. So, but for me, if it is difficult to do it with 27, or it's difficult to do it with 25 or 26 after the enlargement, let's conclude the treaty next to the existing treaties and go forward. It's not new. Americans did also in the 18th century, so it's not that it has not been tried already in the past.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure talking to you as ever. And dear friends, we look forward to having you with us in the next edition of Talking Europe about the European elections. Thanks for joining.